He walked into the courtroom wearing a worn hoodie, hands tucked into his pockets, standing quietly beside the defendant's table, only 19 years old, facing serious charges, grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The judge glanced down from the bench with a smirk barely disguised as indifference. The prosecutor looked ready to wrap it all up in minutes. Everyone in the room thought the same thing. This is going to be easy. But then, he spoke, and everything began to shift, not with shouting, not with arrogance, but with knowledge, with clarity, and with a series of questions no one expected from a teenager without a private attorney. At the Worthy Stories, we don't just tell stories to entertain. We tell them to hold up a mirror, to listen to the quiet voices that, too, often go unheard, the ones that challenge systems and sometimes change them. If you believe that justice doesn't belong only to the powerful, but to anyone brave enough to stand up for it, then subscribe and join us as we honor truth, courage, and the people who refuse to be silenced. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The air inside the Fulton County Courthouse in downtown Atlanta felt thick, almost suffocating. Spectators filled the gallery, whispering among themselves as the scene at the front unfolded. At the defendant's table stood a young man who looked too small for the space he occupied. Hands in his pockets, chin raised just enough to show he wasn't scared. Malik Rivers, 19, stood accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. Serious charges, no doubt. But if anyone looked closely, they'd notice something unusual. Malik wasn't just standing there. He was studying everything. Across the bench, Judge Harold Linwood leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping lazily on the polished oak. He stared. Over the rim of his glasses, lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. You think you're some kind of legal expert? This ain't your high school debate club, kid, the courtroom chuckled. The bailiff, the court reporter, even the prosecutor, it was clear they weren't taking him seriously. But Malik didn't flinch. He wasn't here to impress them. While other kids memorized football stats, Malik had memorized case law. While his friends played video games, he argued imaginary trials. His bedroom. His mother, Angela Rivers, had worked as a paralegal for over 2 decades. She came home with war stories from the legal world, about careless prosecutors, burned-out public defenders, and biased judges. Malik listened, learned, and by the time he was 14, he could dissect a trial better than most law school students. None of that mattered to Judge Linwood. To him, Malik was just another young man caught in the system. "Let's make this quick," Linwood said, flipping open the case file. "I've got a tea time at 2. Laughter rippled through the room again. But this time, Malik smiled. Just barely, because the judge had just made his first mistake, and no one in the room even noticed. The prosecutor, Alan Bradbury, rose from his chair with the confident air of a man who had already won. His suit was immaculate, his tie was sharp, his voice, that of someone who had delivered this speech 100 times before. "Your Honor, the state will demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Malik Rivers, was apprehended in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 BMW 530i, reported missing only hours before his arrest." Bradbury's tone was smooth, practiced, and full of certainty. The defendant attempted to flee through downtown Atlanta, only to be caught shortly after. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The facts are crystal clear. The evidence speaks for itself. Murmurs rolled through the gallery. On the surface, it sounded damning: a stolen car, a foot chase, fingerprints. Judge Linwood looked down at Malik again over the rim of his glasses, then turned back to Bradbury. "Continue." Bradbury walked with purpose toward the jury box, the sound of his leather shoes tapping smartly against the floor. The defense may try to paint this as a misunderstanding, that Mr. Rivers was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But let's be honest with ourselves. What kind of victim runs from the police? The room grew still, all eyes on Malik. Judge Linwood leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, watching. Malik didn't blink. Bradbury flipped a page. From the folder on the table beside him. "Your Honor, I have here the sworn testimony of Officer Sean McKinney, who personally identified the defendant behind the wheel prior to the arrest. The vehicle was confirmed stolen. The arrest was conducted entirely by the book. Linwood exhaled through his nose and gave a small nod. Sounds straightforward to me, and to most people in the room. It probably did. But Malik had studied trials long enough to know how easily a story can be crafted to feel convincing. He stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor, but not in fear. In calculation, Judge Linwood tapped his gavel lightly. Let's hear from the defense. He glanced toward Malik's attorney, a public defender named Rachel Kim, who had barely spoken since walking into the room. She stood, clearing her throat nervously. Your Honor, my client. But Malik gently touched her arm, a quiet signal. She paused, unsure, then slowly sat back down. Then for the first time, Malik spoke. Your Honor, I'll be representing myself. A stunned silence rippled across the courtroom. Linwood blinked in disbelief. You'll what? I'll be defending myself. His voice was calm, steady, unapologetic. The bailiff raised an eyebrow. The courtroom began to stir. Bradbury's smile slipped just a little before he let out a dry laugh. This should be entertaining. But no one was laughing when Malik stepped forward, hands still in his pockets, because everything was about to change. He paused in the center of the room, letting the silence stretch just a few seconds longer, long enough to make the room uncomfortable. Then finally he spoke. Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to clarify something with the prosecution. Bradbury crossed his arms, almost bored. Go ahead. You said Officer McKinney personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested. That's in his report, correct? Correct. Malik nodded, then turned toward Judge Linwood. Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence. Linwood narrowed his eyes. On what grounds? Malik removed his hands from his pockets for the first time and gestured toward the prosecutor's table. Because Officer McKinney never saw me in that vehicle. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began. A wave of confusion crossed Bradbury's face. What exactly are you talking about? Malik stepped forward. If the court permits, I'd like to request access to Officer McKinney's GPS logs from that evening. His report says he witnessed me in the car. If that's true, the location data should confirm it. He let the implication hang in the air. But I have a feeling it won't. The gallery began murmuring louder. Whispers swirled in pockets. Across the room, Linwood looked toward Bradbury, frowning. Mr. Bradbury, does the state have any objection to verifying those GPS records? Bradbury hesitated. The pause was brief, but it was long enough. The jury noticed, the gallery noticed, and most importantly, the judge noticed. Malik took a quiet breath. He had seen this hesitation in hundreds of real trials on video, in articles, in transcripts. He knew this moment. If the prosecution was confident in their case, they wouldn't be stalling. Linwood sighed and rubbed his temple. Counselor? Bradbury finally shook his head. No objection, Your Honor, but it was already too late. The shift had begun. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing. The room had gone quiet, but the tension was deafening. Bradbury cleared his throat, shuffling papers to regain his rhythm. Your Honor, while we wait on the GPS records, one thing remains undisputed. The defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle. Malik nodded slightly, face unreadable. That's true, he said. Then he stepped forward, his voice calm and deliberate. But let's talk about what that actually means. Judge Linwood raised an eyebrow, motioning for him to continue. Malik turned to the jury, locking eyes with them one by one. Not as a desperate teen, but as someone who knew the room, the process, and the language. The prosecution wants you to believe that fingerprints on a steering wheel equal guilt. That's the story being sold here, but let's think logically. He took a breath, letting the silence settle. Let's say you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up. Then you hang it back and leave. A few hours later, someone shoplifts that jacket. He looked at the jurors. Would your fingerprints on that jacket mean you stole it? A few jurors glanced at each other. Someone in the gallery muttered, "That's a good point." Malik didn't wait. The car in question was parked outside, a 7-Eleven hours before it was reported stolen. I was inside that store with 3 friends. And yeah, when we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door. He shrugged lightly. It was unlocked. I was curious. I didn't steal anything. I didn't drive off. I didn't damage the vehicle. I touched it. Then his tone sharpened ever so slightly. "Does touching something make you a criminal?" Bradbury fidgeted with his notes, visibly uncomfortable. But Malik wasn't finished. "And since we're on the topic of the fingerprint analysis," he turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, was the forensic analyst who processed those prints subpoenaed to testify?" Linwood looked to Bradbury. Bradbury hesitated, then admitted no. Malik nodded, calm as ever. "So let me get this straight. The state is trying to convict me using forensic evidence, but didn't bring in the person who actually handled and tested that evidence?" He looked at the jury again. "That means I don't get to ask how the prints were lifted. I don't get to question how they were stored, labeled, or tested. I don't get to challenge anything about the process, because the one person who could answer those questions isn't—" Here, Bradbury's jaw tightened. Malik gave a subtle nod, as if that confirmed everything he needed. Judge Linwood leaned back slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. This case was no longer going according to plan, and Malik, he was just getting started. He stepped forward again. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit a piece of evidence, a signed statement from the owner of the vehicle." Linwood's eyes narrowed. "The owner?" "Yes. Mr. Ronald Whitmore, the registered owner of the BMW. He gave a statement to police the night the car was stolen, a statement that oddly never made it into the prosecution's exhibits." He turned toward Bradbury. "Do you recall what Mr. Whitmore told officers that night?" Bradbury's jaw clenched. He said nothing. Malik pulled a paper from the folder at his table. The kind of movement that in a movie would cue dramatic music. According to his original statement, "I left my car running while I ran inside the store. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off. But it wasn't the guy they arrested. I saw the kid, and he was white." A collective gasp spread through the courtroom. Malik held up the paper. "That's from the original police report. The same report the prosecution ignored. The same report the arresting officer failed to mention in his testimony." He turned back to the judge. "They want this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the description of the real thief, am guilty beyond a reasonable doubt." Bradbury sprang forward, voice tense. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was found in possession of the vehicle." But Malik shook his head. "No, I wasn't." His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the courtroom like glass. "I was arrested blocks away, walking home after getting snacks with friends. The car had already been abandoned. I wasn't in it. I wasn't near it. I wasn't running. The only thing linking me to this case is bad assumptions and lazy police work." Judge Linwood let out a slow breath. The entire room could feel it. The case was unraveling, and fast. Malik turned back to the jury one last time. The real suspect got away that night. But when officers found a black kid in the area, they decided that was close enough. That's what this case is really about. Silence. Judge Linwood cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Does the prosecution have anything further?" Bradbury stood still, face pale, voice flat. "No, Your Honor." Judge Linwood exhaled, long and slow, his fingers resting on the gavel like he wasn't sure whether to strike it or throw it. The case had collapsed in front of him, not from theatrics, not from outrage, but from precision, from logic, from knowledge that shouldn't belong to a 19-year-old defendant, but did. Malik Rivers stood calmly, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady. The courtroom had gone silent, but tension hung like humidity. Linwood glanced at the jury. He didn't need to ask them what they were thinking. He already knew. Finally, the judge leaned forward. Case dismissed. A moment of stunned silence. Then, chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, others in stunned relief. The gallery stirred, reporters scribbled, Murmurs filled the air like rising static. Malik didn't move. He stood still, letting the weight of the moment settle, letting the truth do what it had fought so hard to do, be heard. Judge Linwood sat quietly, gripping the edge of the bench, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Malik, and this time the smirk was gone. The skepticism was gone. There was something else now, something that looked like recognition, regret, maybe. Malik met the judge's eyes and turned to walk. But just as he reached the courtroom door, "Mr. Rivers." Malik stopped, hand on the door handle. He didn't turn around. There was a long pause. Then Linwood spoke again, quieter this time. "You should consider law school." A small smirk flickered on Malik's face, not out of arrogance, but understanding. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way. Outside the Fulton County Courthouse, the warm Georgia air hit like a wall. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones reaching like weapons. "Malik, did you expect the case to be thrown out? What are you going to do next? How did it feel to outsmart a career prosecutor?" Malik pulled his hoodie up over his head, barely glancing at them. He wasn't here for the circus. This wasn't about proving he was clever. It was about something bigger. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, his mother, Angela Rivers, waited, arms crossed, face unreadable. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then she shook her head and exhaled hard. "Boy, you scared me half to death." Malik scratched the back of his neck. "Had to take the shot, Ma." Angela stared for another moment, then pulled him into a hug, tight, fierce, and full of everything words couldn't say. "You always were the stubborn one," she whispered. Cameras kept clicking, but Malik wasn't paying attention anymore. Across the street, standing beside his car, Judge Linwood watched. His posture was different now. No arrogance, no amusement, only silence. He hadn't expected this case to be anything but routine. Another name, another file, another conviction. But now, he knew he'd remember this one. Because Malik Rivers had done something rare. He had made the system look at itself, and for once, it blinked first. Back at home, the evening light spilled through the kitchen window as Malik Rivers sat quietly with his mother, Angela. She poured him tea like it was any other day, like her son hadn't just dismantled a courtroom's assumptions brick by brick. "You didn't just win today," she said softly. "You showed them." Malik didn't say anything for a moment. He just nodded, staring into the steam rising from the mug, because he knew this wasn't about him anymore. Across the city, conversations were happening, in classrooms, in homes, in law firms, in police precincts. People were asking the same question. How many other cases didn't end this way? How many defendants didn't know the right questions to ask? How many didn't have the confidence to speak up, or the knowledge to challenge the evidence? How many had been swept away not by guilt, but by silence? Malik had exposed the cracks, not because he was special, but because he had prepared, because he had listened, studied, fought. But what about the ones who couldn't? That thought stayed with him. 2 weeks later, Malik walked back into the Fulton County Courthouse, this time not as a defendant, but as a guest speaker for a youth legal outreach program. The courtroom looked smaller now, not because it had changed, but because he had. He stood in front of a room full of teenagers, kids who, like him, knew what it meant to be underestimated, and he told them the story, not to brag, but to show them. That knowledge was power, that their voice could shake walls, that the law wasn't just for the people who wrote it, but also for the people willing to learn it. "This won't be the last courtroom I stand in," Malik said, his voice strong. "But next time, I won't be on trial. I'll be standing behind the bench, or maybe beside someone who needs a defender." Smiles, applause, hope, because this wasn't just his victory, it was the beginning of something larger. Here's the truth. The justice system is built on laws, but it's run by people. And people can be biased. They can be careless. But they can also change when they're shown the truth. Malik Rivers didn't just walk free that day, he walked forward, and because of that, others now have a path to follow. If this story made you pause, even for a second, share it. Let's keep the conversation going, because next time, it might not be Malik. It might be someone you know. At The Worthy Stories, we believe real change begins with understanding, and that every story, like Malik's, is a reminder of what's possible when courage meets knowledge. Subscribe for more stories that reveal truth, challenge bias, and honor the quiet heroes among us. Until next time, stay aware, stay kind, and stay worthy.